welcome, or I guess you're welcoming us.
Welcome.
I'm going to introduce myself, and my colleagues will do the same, and we'll ask you to introduce yourselves and also your teacher.
Okay.
My name is Susan Scholten. I'm the chair of the history department at the University of Denver.
I'm Pam Gable. I'm an attorney here in Denver.
And I'm Stephen Groom. I'm a district court judge in the 11th Judicial District, which is probably, you know, South Park cartoon. That's me.
I'm Renee Hansen, and I'm a senior. I'm Riley Purnell, and I'm a senior.
I'm Jonathan Warnoff, and I'm a junior, and we
This
represent
is Mr. Ryman.
Thank you. Well, we are Unit 6, as you know, and we're going to be doing questions. History has amply proved the virtue of political activity by minority dissident groups who innumerable times have been the vanguard of democratic thought and whose programs were ultimately accepted. Do you agree or disagree with the opinion expressed here? Why? What evidence can you offer to support your position? Which, if any, of the goals dissident groups hope to achieve put them in the vanguard of democratic thought, and why? How would you explain the concept of civil disobedience, and why have minorities often employed civil disobedience in an effort to achieve their goals?
Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The ultimate measure of man is not where he stands at times of comfort and convenience, but when he stands at times of challenge and controversy." Dr. King represented a minority who was tyrannized by an insensitive majority, causing dissident groups to publicize their grievances, sometimes by means of civil disobedience. The First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees the right to freedom of speech, the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Historically, minorities, who in any democratic system can be tyrannized by a majority, have utilized their First Amendment rights to publicize their message and gain support for equality.
African Americans organized a movement that served as a vanguard of democratic reform. Jim Crow laws, in effect for over 100 years after slavery was eliminated, caused African Americans to be discriminated against in public places. This minority fought for social and political equality through peaceful means such as marches, protests, and sit-ins in an attempt to raise awareness of their plight. In his I Have a Dream speech after the March on Washington, Dr. King said, "Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice."
In the mid-1800s, women also served as the vanguard of democratic thought by advocating for suffrage. At the Seneca Falls Convention in New York, this Declaration of Sentiments was adopted to specify the ways in which American society degraded women and how numerous laws and social conventions hindered them. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony was arrested for voting. Although Anthony broke a law, she did so without harming anyone or infringing on other people's rights. Through peaceful means, the women's rights movement continued to raise the consciousness of a male-dominated society until the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920.
Sexual minorities have also served as a vanguard of democratic thought. To promote their concerns, LGBT advocates march in pride parades to commemorate the Stonewall riots, and also participate in national days of silence in remembrance of those who have died because of discrimination of their sexual orientation. Such efforts are paying off. Just last month in the Senate, 7 Republicans crossed party lines to begin debate on a bill that will outlaw workplace discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. An opinion poll taken by the Pew Research Center found that in 2003, 58% of Americans oppose gay marriage, while today, only 44% oppose it.
At times, minorities have employed civil disobedience to further their goals. In his essay, Civil Disobedience, Henry David Thoreau contended, "All men recognize the right to refuse allegiance to the right of revolution and to resist the government. Shall we be content to obey unjust laws, or shall we transgress them at once?" Civil disobedience is a deliberate flouting of civil authority based on some moral or philosophical principle, which may involve breaking laws that society believes to be unjust. In 1955, Rosa Parks demonstrated civil disobedience by refusing to give up her seat on a public bus to a white man and was thrown in jail as a result.
Not all minority movements succeed. The KKK routinely expressed its hatred of minorities, and the Westboro Baptist Church staunchly opposes gay rights. Its pastor, Fred Phelps, recently voiced his opinion, saying, "These fags are going to hell. They ought to be so thankful that we've dedicated time and resources to preach to them." And he holds protests at military funerals. These minority views, too, are protected by the First Amendment, as confirmed in Snyder v. Phelps. The Supreme Court ruled that although Reverend Phelps's message may be offensive to others, under the Free Speech Clause of the First Amendment, it cannot be argued that the Westboro speech on public issues was protected because it didn't constitute a personal attack on any individual. We are now ready for your questions.
I'll jump in. Our form of government is a representative democracy. Would you agree with that? So if you disagree with what's going on, you feel like it's just not going the right direction, this country or this, whatever, you, is it your recourse then to complain to and voice your opinion to your elected representative? And if he or she won't listen, vote him out? At what point should you consider breaking the law, and that's what civil disobedience is, as a way to voice your opinion?
Well, the first way to voice your opinion is definitely through voting, just because that is the most accepted form of protest by the people. But when the government doesn't listen and the majority of the people also aren't accepting your views, civil disobedience is employed because it's a way, like instead of violence, it's a way of bringing attention to your opinion without harming anyone, and it's also not infringing on any other people's rights.
As Riley said, voting is definitely the first method, and it's definitely a very proven method. However, as time goes on, it seems as if most Americans aren't voting anymore. In the 2010 presidential election, only 58% of Americans were voted. 2012 presidential election, compared to Australia's 2010 legislative election, not even their presidential election, where 93% were represented there. So voting is definitely the first outlet to do so, but it's not really being employed to its fullest extent in the United States. But when civil disobedience is employed, it seems to have a great impact on the people, especially during the African American and civil rights movement, where most people in the North didn't realize that there were Jim Crow laws and discriminations in voting against the black minority. And in the North, it was, you weren't there, so you didn't understand what was happening. But once people began to publicize their message and it began to get out, it seemed as more people supported them.
In answer to your question, at what point does civil disobedience become just? In Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail, he declares the importance of civil disobedience, and that if there is an unjust law that infringes on someone's natural rights, then it must be broken. And this can be seen in the African American civil rights movement, where Jim Crow laws segregated African Americans unjustly and therefore gave them an opportunity to write.
But these are difficult questions. We've picked out some of the easier ones, right, women, African Americans, but you've also picked one that's very live now, right, same-sex marriage, same-sex rights, I'm sorry, gay rights. You talk about recourse to civil disobedience coming when your natural rights are being violated. But who decides? This is obviously a country that's deeply divided over same-sex marriage, for instance. How does one know when recourse to civil disobedience in that instance is appropriate? And who decides what natural rights are or are not being fulfilled?
I think it's mainly up to the people who feel as if their natural rights are not being heard. For example, I never knew that the northern part of Colorado felt as if they weren't being heard, and I would never have known that unless they had stepped up and said something. But only they really knew that they didn't feel as if they were being represented, and it felt as if that they weren't having the life or the property or the way things they wanted things to go. And so I think it's mainly up to the people. I think it might be a surprise to some other people, as it was for me, as it was for the Northerners in the civil disobedience area of the civil rights movement. But I just feel as if the people are the ones that decide that, because they're the ones that have to advocate for their own rights if the government isn't protecting them.
And given that we failed that, the Northern Colorado secession movement, does that suggest that in fact their rights aren't being violated? Do you see? I mean,
Yes,
Yeah.
It's a very difficult and sticky situation, especially since, As mentioned earlier in Henry David Thoreau in his essay Civil Disobedience, he said it's up to the people to recognize the right of revolution, but it's also up to the people, as stated by Aristotle, a Greek philosopher. It's a citizen's special characteristic to participate in the employment of justice and in offices in their government. And so if the people in the Northern Secession want to secede from Northern Colorado, they need to first make sure to participate in justice before they participate in civil disobedience.
And also with the fact that if people's rights aren't being heard, in the Declaration of Independence, our founders wrote that if our rights are not being protected by our government, which is what the government is there to do, it is employed by the people, for the people, then they are they have the right and the responsibility to overthrow the government and replace it with one that will secure their future.
When a majority is being insensitive and it's not open to the minority's message, then that's when it's constitutional to commit civil disobedience. What can be seen in Occupy Wall Street, where there's a 99% that feels that their voice isn't adequately represented and that their 1% is getting all the attention. When the majority doesn't listen, that's when it's important to
But who
protest.
decides what's unjust or just in the law? That's another day, Warren.
And since I never got to ask a question,
I'm sorry about that.
No. You all presented some of the most interesting examples that we've heard today. And I thought particularly the contrasting minority views on gay rights between the gays trying to get rights and the Fred Phelps group, which also may be a minority. It's hard to know in the shift. The Northern Colorado example, these were all ones that we heard for the first time. You did a great job of working together and playing off the answers. I was very impressed with your examples.
Thank you.
And the example throwing out the voter turnout during the last presidential election. Oh, what a great example to throw into a very difficult question. I echo what my colleague said in that your answers and examples you raised are fascinating. This is new territory for us. And we've heard a lot of the same things so far, variations of it, but your thinking, I think, went to another level, and I commend you for it. This is great application. I thought you did an outstanding job.
Jonathan, I was particularly impressed with something that happened in the Senate that I wasn't even aware of, so just a month ago, that was a terrific example. But as the historian, I'm going to say one thing, and that is be careful about citing the Declaration of Independence as justifying all right of revolt, because we fought a big war over this, and ultimately Lincoln and a lot of other people decided that you don't just get to secede when you don't agree with the majority, right? And in that case, that's a great example, because that minority was fighting for the right to own others, right? So I encourage you to think a little more about the dilemmas and the tension, and you've clearly done so, as Pam has said, with your recognition of the Snyder v. Phelps case. That was terrific use of the law. So nice work.
Thank you.
Great job.